Hi, I'm Skip Rizzo, and I direct the Medical Virtual Reality Lab at the University of Southern California Institute for Creative Technologies. And today on the show, we're going to talk about the use of VR to treat PTSD, even the kind you might experience as a leader. Then, hopefully, we'll get to talk a little bit about the future of leadership training and how much of it's going to take place in the metaverse. Finally, we'll discuss the double-edged sword that is AI and the reason that great leadership is needed in its application. Stay tuned.
Congratulations! You are tuned into Dov Baron's Leadership and Loyalty Show, the #1 podcast for Fortune 500 executives and those who are dedicated to creating a quantum leap in leadership. Your host, Dov Baron. He's an executive mentor to leaders like you, a contributing writer for Entrepreneur Magazine, CEO World, and he's been featured on CNN, Fox, CBS, and many other notable sites. Dov Baron is an international business speaker who was named by Inc. magazine as one of the top 100 leadership speakers to hire. Now, over to Dov Baron.
Welcome, dear friends, fans, and fellow aficionados of leadership excellence. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Leadership and Loyalty Tips for Executives. Even if the changes don't particularly seem imminent right now, industry experts such as Fortune have stated that robots, quote, and I want to be clear about what I mean by robots, not some metal human being, but robots will replace 40% of jobs in the next 15 years. AI and advanced technologies the processes are expected to get a lot smarter. Machines will become more humanized over the long run. And on an everyday basis, we're all seeing that chatbots are increasingly part of our consumer interactions and customer interactions. Self-driving cars are already here. It won't be long before autonomous vehicles take over every driving job, from taxi driver to Uber driver to truck driver. And there's 1.7 million truck drivers in the United States today. So, it's going to be significant. Now, you might be thinking that your job is safe, but is it? There does seem to be some professions that we might think of as being, quote, untouchable. But is that actually true? For instance, what if AI or virtual reality doctors are not only better, but wait for it, preferred? Well, stay tuned, because that's where we're going over the next 2 episodes. These next 2 episodes are brought to you in part by the Society for Brain Mapping and Therapeutics. The Society for Brain Mapping and Therapeutics catalyzes interactions between clinical, biological, physical, and engineering sciences, examining emerging disciplines such as nanotechnology, image-guided therapy, stem cell therapy, biomaterials, and tissue engineering for their application in diagnosis and treatment and rehabilitation of neurological diseases. For more information, simply go to www.worldbrainmapping.org. As always, we need your help in staying relevant, so please get over to wherever you tune into the show and do us a favor. Please rate, review, and subscribe to the show. If you are a regular listener, big thank you to you for being such a loyal listener, because you've made us the #1 podcast in the world for Fortune 500 listeners, and we are honored and grateful to be cited by Inc.com as the #1 podcast to make you a better leader. By the way, I know you're curious. I'm Dov Baron. I'm your host, and I'm here to assist you tapping into the one thing in your business that changes everything by transforming meaning into action. Curious to know more? Simply go to dovbaron.com. That's DOVBARON.com. All right, let's strip it down and dive right in. AI, virtual reality, the metaverse, they're no longer science fiction. They are already part of your life, even if you don't recognize it. When you open up your phone and you use Face ID, that is AI. When you use Alexa or Siri, that's AI. Smart thermostats, fridges, lights, self-driving cars, all AI. But there's another level of depth that is often referred to as the metaverse, where using VR, you're able to experience something, quote, artificial with all of your senses as if it was fully real in your world. Moreover, you can do it with varying degrees of anonymity. Now, you may be thinking about the different nefarious applications of that, but what about being able to have someone step into a previously terrifying or powerless situation in order to regain their sense of empowerment? How might that shift the way someone sees the world, and for that matter, themselves in it? Well, that's been the driving force behind the work of our esteemed guest today. He is a pioneer who is massively and positively changing the lives of people who previously had seen no way out of their trauma that they'd experienced. Our guest today for the next 2 episodes is Dr. Skip Rizzo. He is an internationally recognized thought leader in his field and has been hailed by Polygon as one of the top 25 greatest innovators in the field of virtual reality. Dr. Rizzo is a clinical psychologist and director of medical virtual reality at the University of Southern California Institute of Creative Technologies. He is also a research professor with USC Department of Psychiatry and USC Davis School of Gerontology. The volume and innovation of his work has earned him many awards. His effort to revolutionize healthcare with the development of innovative VR products has made a positive impact in his field. Over the last 25 years, Skip has conducted research on design, development, and evaluation into virtual reality systems. His work has focused on PTSD, TBI, traumatic brain injury, autism, ADHD, Alzheimer's disease, stroke, and other clinical conditions. In spite of the diversity of these clinical R&D areas, the common thread that drives all of his work with digital technology involves the study of how interactive and immersive VR, virtual reality, simulations can be usefully applied to address human healthcare needs beyond what is possible in traditional 20th century tools and methodologies. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together and help me to welcome the godfather of virtual reality, Dr. Skip Rizzo! And the crowd goes wild, young man. Good to have you here, mate. Thanks for joining us.
Glad to be here. Looking forward to this for a long time.
Yeah, me too, very much. Now, I like to start the show with the context of the show, which is leadership. So in the context of leadership, how do you see VR? How would you predict VR, virtual reality / the metaverse, impacting leadership over the next 20 years? Because it's going to impact everything. And as much as we'd like to deny that, it's going to impact everything. So do you see how it might impact leadership itself?
I see two different ways, two separate orthogonal directions. One is in leadership training. First off, you got to define what leadership is. I see it as complex orchestration of cognitive, emotional, and behavioral skills that inspire people to do things that they might not have thought about or that they didn't want to do, but inspire people to do their best and accomplish, some shared mission or objective. And in one way, a leader sets a tempo for an organization by leveraging the best tools to accomplish those aims, that mission.
Yep.
And technology, certainly, you can be a neo-Luddite and say, oh no, I like my old school method and so on. And you can still be successful in that way. But
of course,
companies in the modern era moving forward have to have a leader that understands the value of leveraging these sorts of technologies, whether it's, your basic mobile app, your database tools, or leveraging simulation technology, whether it's virtual reality, augmented reality, or, all the MR, XR acronyms for this field. But leveraging that for, the aim of accomplishing the mission of your organization. And, that can mean developing a tool that you market, developing a tool for internal training, developing methodologies that increase the efficiency and, I would say, engagement in the workflow. If you build out a tool that adds a brick to the pile of somebody below you, they're going to be resentful. They're not going to feel inspired. But you add a tool into the mix that improves their efficiency, whether it involves AI, and we'll dig into the AI concept
Of
because I
course.
think there's a lot of issues around that are good and bad. But leveraging AI for decision support and calibration of how decisions have impact on the aims of the organization, the reaching objectives, and so on. I think that's an important topic. So I think a good leader, sets the stage with recognition of keeping the workforce that you have, or the team, or your compatriots moving forward in a positive direction, regardless of the aim or objective. The other area is in leadership training. Now we're starting to see more and more VR type applications, and a lot of times leveraging spherical video for teaching diversity, equity, inclusion. I recently tested out some stuff by a company, Penumbra. I'm not sure if I can legally mention these companies on your podcast, but what the heck, we can edit it out. But they've built out spherical video of common contexts that,
Right.
good leadership and, good employee behavior can be observed, as well as the bad. And when you're immersed in these environments, even though there's spherical video, you can't navigate through them. You can't really interact in a deep way. You can be like a fly on the wall during an event. It is very impactful because that experience of being there, that episodic memory of being in a place when something's happening, goes well beyond watching passively on a flat screen monitor, a story play out in a video format. When you're actually at the scene of the crime, it sticks. And when I tested this stuff out first about 6 months ago, I talked about it with the team that was developing it, and then disappeared for a couple months, and then it came up again, and I was shocked at how much of the detail I still remembered from these experiences of religious problems, persecution in the workplace, sexual harassment, of course,
Right.
all the big topics. I remember details, and then I thought about how, about a month earlier, I had taken the USC course in sexual harassment online. And, it's well done for what it is, but I couldn't remember a damn element
Right.
of the simulation, not even simulations, the videos or the
Right.
cartoons, flash cartoons they showed to exemplify a topic. And it really, again, reminded me that virtual reality, the immersive, interactive element, is fundamentally different than passive
Right.
observation.
And that's where I think we need to sort of jump off here, because I think that for a lot of us, we've seen, if we're not in that world, we've seen VR and it's looked pretty lame. It's the old school thing, and it's not even a video game. It's a bad video game. It's not as realistic as some of the stuff that some of our kids are playing with, and it seems like I would never get that, because, like I said, it's old school. It's not real, and so the brain is saying, this is not real. This is not real. But where VR has gone to is a completely different place, and so I believe the key element, and you're the expert, so you can certainly shoot me down, but I believe the key element is in that first of all, in that observation you just talked about, is mirror neurons. When I'm observing something, the mirror neurons in my brain are firing as if I'm doing the thing I'm observing. That's different than a single flat experience, because the best way to get a mirror neuron working is in multiple senses. And it seems like VR, apart from smell, and I guess maybe that can be manufactured, but all the senses are involved. I saw an amazing video of a guy wearing a VR set, walking on a plank of wood, but you can see on the split screen that he's walking a high wire. And this guy is, technical term, shitting himself crossing a plank of wood on a normal floor, right? But in his world, he's on a high wire above above a crevasse, and it obviously feels very, very real. So, is that the main difference? Is the accessing, the ability to access the other senses, and that catalyzes the emotional sense?
I think that what we do see is, yes, we can fool the brain, even though your frontal lobes may be telling you, oh, it's just a simulation. I know I'm in my therapist's office or I'm in this lab space, whatever. The perceptual array of the stimuli and being actually embodied within this immersive space, it goes right into areas of the limbic system that just respond to that stimuli, even if it's not graphically sophisticated. If you got that perception of depth and height and so forth, that part of the brain is firing off, and it's very emotionally evocative. So even though the frontal lobes are saying, ah, no, it's just a simulation, we're activating limbic system, and it's the spread of this across the brain. It's not just, too localized like that or anything, but we're activating that area, regardless of what the frontal lobes are saying. And that's the magic that happens in most clinical applications. And let's face it, in therapy, we're talking about activating emotions and reprocessing them in more functional ways. And this is a great tool to do that.
Yeah, I mean, I've often said to people, oh, I don't think VR would work for me. And I say, have you ever seen a horror movie and jumped? And they go,
Exactly.
yeah. And I go, well, is Jason in your living room? No. Do you know you're watching a film? Yes. Then why did you jump? Have you ever watched the TV series This Is Us? Yes. Did you cry? Yes. Are these stories? Yes. Are these actors? Yes. Do you know it's not real? Logically, rationally? Yes. So why the hell are you crying? I cry. I cried at every episode of that show, right? I'm a pretty cognitive guy. I was, because that part of our brain is not processing. This is not real. Or this is imaginary. It's tapping that emotional source. And this is what I love about your work, is that you've gone after this deeply emotional part of the brain that I think that one of the great illusions is we think that we're cognitive beings, right? So talk to us about that illusion that we're we're on this evolutionary scale and we're so great because we're so cognitive, and I'm often laughing.
This is the issue around cognitive behavioral therapy, which, by the way, has probably the best evidence of its effectiveness. But I think that is because in the course of cognitive behavior therapy, we're essentially, it's an abstract process of thinking through events that you experience and understanding how the event in the world might make you feel by way of your interpretation of the event. So a lot of times they talk about distorted thinking or cognitive distortions, and that's where you get into a habit of always this sort of self-downing interpretation. So if you do something well, I just got lucky. You do something poorly, oh, I'm a bad person, I'll never get better. And people that are depressed or have anxiety disorders oftentimes make that connection for whatever reason. We're not going to go into etiology here, but
Right.
and so part of the cognitive behavioral approach is to help people to recognize that that's happening and do these active thought experiments, if you will, to countermand that type of thinking. Because the idea is, it's not the event in the world, it's your interpretation or your thoughts about the event that produce the emotion. Now, I think in the process of delivering cognitive behavioral therapy in that format, if you put people in role play situations or you have them monitor their behavior in the real world and have this program running essentially in the frontal lobes, I think
Yeah. I
that
agree.
it does activate enough emotion to have a positive impact. But I think it falls short. If you go to the PTSD work where
Right.
exposure therapy is, you activate that emotion, and in the absence of any real threat happening here in the therapy office, you foster what's called extinction learning in the amygdala. And that has been the mainstay of that type of therapeutic approach. It's basic meat and potatoes conditioning and learning. But I've always felt that gets you in the door, but the process of confronting these challenges, getting over them, talking about it's not a passive therapy. You're narrating your therapeutic experience, your experience with the trauma. You're talking about it. That emotional activation, that is that processing that goes on. That's really where the magic happens. I think conditioning and learning, yes, that exists. But what we do now with VR exposure therapy is actually put people in simulations of the events that they had a difficult experience with, a trauma experience, a combat environment, or an environment where they had been sexually assaulted or harassed, or a motor vehicle accident, a terrorist attack. And at first people said, why the heck would you do that? And I said, well, short answer is, of course, the science supports it. But by putting people in those situations, you activate emotions in a way that are very difficult to activate with standard talk back and forth with the therapists. In people who have textbook PTSD, it's just pure PTSD. They're not depressed. Traditional close your eyes, imagine a scene, talk about it. Pretty good effectiveness rate
Yes.
if people stick with it. But what we found in a recent study that was just accepted for publication, we predicted that people that had comorbid depression, which is a large segment of the PTSD population, that we got better outcomes with that VR activation than the traditional method. Because when someone's depressed, they're so depressed that they're not emotionally engaging directly with the abstract concept of the trauma. And so that was a big finding that came through, because it was pre-planned prediction, very well done randomized controlled trial. And it came true that, VR and traditional methods are pretty much equivalent with, the standard textbook PTSD. But when you have people that are depressed, which is, again, the larger segment of the
Yeah.
group, you see that emotionally evocative experience having an impact and getting through to those folks. And then maybe the conditioning learning element kicks in. On top of that, as you experience this more, you talk about it more, talk about things you never talked to anybody about.
Right.
And that element, I think, really adds to the effect.
So there's a ton to unpack in there, but let's just, if I may, I'm going to just talk a little bit, just context wise, about the work I do, which is emotional source code. And the way I describe it is this: is you got your emotional source code, nobody can change that. So what it simply means is the events of your life had impact on your life, and that's kind of like your emotional DNA. It's laid out. But the epigenetic response to that is different. That's what we call the anatomy of meaning. That's how you react to that. And that anatomy of meaning then gives you your identity based on that meaning, not in reality, but based on that meaning. And out of that springs the beliefs, and out of that springs the behaviors. People are often trying to change behaviors without changing beliefs. They try to change beliefs without changing identity. They try to change identity without going through the anatomy of meaning. And in order to get to the anatomy of meaning, you actually have to understand what is in the emotional source code. What I love about your work, and this work in particular, is it gives me the opportunity to step into my emotional source code as it is. So, my stepfather did this to me. Okay. Now here I am, and I can see that this is the reaction of a little boy, of course. But I can also, and I'm fully experiencing that, but I'm also the fly on the wall who can whisper to that little boy, this guy's a fucking monster and you're fine. You're good. You're pure. And as random and weird as that might seem, the emotional connection between the little boy, the mirror neurons between my imaginary little boy and me, the adult, in the process is transformational. And that's what I love about this work is like, I don't know any other work aside from mine that's doing that. I don't. And it's like, this is why I was like really excited about when we had our first conversation. It was just quite a while ago. It's like, this gets to, because, you know, as you said, CBT, very good. Jungian, Freudian, they've got their uses. Absolutely. Hypnotherapy, absolutely. All of the therapies, I think they're all great. Every one of them, great in the context of where they can be used. But none of them are right. None
Right.
of them are the panacea. But walking somebody through that process in those 5 levels, emotional source code, anatomy of meaning, identity, beliefs, behavior, is like, wow. And you seem to be able to do that with this. So to sort of go to the other side of that, which I know that people will maybe have some questions about, which is, and I know you and I can answer this, but I want to hear what you have to say about it, is the fear of re-traumatizing. So here's this man going back into a war situation where he's got the PTSD, the comorbid PTSD from, or this person going back to when they were a child and they were sexually molested, or whatever the situation is, this fear of, am I just re-wounding them? Am I re-traumatizing them? Talk to us a little bit about that, because I think that's a part that doesn't compute for a lot of people.
Absolutely. And that was always one of the early days critiques,
Yeah.
that you're going to do something that's going to hurt the person more than help them. And first off, the science over time has shown that not to be the case. And part of that may be related to the quality of the clinicians that actually implement this type of therapy. They're extremely well trained. They take this at a pace that a client, patient can handle. It's not like you throw somebody in the deep end of the pool. With that said, up front with patients, you say, this is hard medicine for a hard problem. It's going to get harder before it gets easier. The path to healing is going to involve a little bit of pain as you revisit these things. And we're going to be peeling back the scab. And we're going to have you do things that you haven't done in other contexts at a pace you can handle. And it's an opportunity to face these things down. Now, with that said, we get great response with people that complete therapy, but this is the Achilles heel with these trauma-focused therapies, particularly with prolonged exposure, is the dropout rate. For a number of folks, they get to that point where they're really starting to dig in, and it's like, I don't want to do it. And you just try to get them just to go a little further. Don't avoid, confront. You're going to reprocess when you face a fear and nothing really bad, there's no consequence that happens. All of a sudden that fear becomes a little bit more diminished. It doesn't activate those triggers, and we need to have sufficient trials for that. But it is a hard therapy, and we believe that by using VR, and this is where we have to go in the future with the research, we believe using VR we can titrate that stimulus presentation at a level where a person left to their own devices and imagination, being pushed to imagine things, are seeing things in a maybe more intense, painful way, or in a distorted fashion based on the symptoms of the actual clinical condition. Whereas when you're putting somebody in VR, you can put them in things that are reminiscent but not quite there. And this was a big challenge we had when we embarked on the military sexual trauma project, where people got that, all right, combat related PTSD, you have good outcomes, we're going to get off your back about that. And there's a lot of great people. I'm just one of many people that that worked in traditional exposure therapy that were on board with the VR. Barbara Rothbaum, Joanne DeFede, Chris Rice, go through a giant list, Mike Roy,
Mm.
who we both know. And, so we got all these folks together, and then we said, okay, we're gonna do sexual trauma. We're not gonna recreate sexual traumas. We're just gonna recreate the context in
Yes.
which these things can occur. And we got funding from the military, from an organization called TATRIC. And the key thing was, all right, look, do a safety and feasibility trial, limited number of subjects, very closely monitored. And so we had 11 people that completed the treatment. And the whole thing was, are you messing people up or are you helping them? And number one, no adverse events, which was really good. And even with a small sample, we got statistically significant and clinically meaningful reductions in PTSD with the groups using the CAPS, the gold standard measure in that area. And so that's just one data point that if you have good, well-trained, thoughtful clinicians, you're not eliminating clinician. I know we're going to get into this later on about
exactly.
AI, can AI do it better? But when you have a good partner along in the process by way of a good clinician, I think, you see the success. And by the way, that is just one sort of anecdotal study, but there was recently a study, January 19, I believe, in Journal of Anxiety Disorders, which was a deterioration analysis where they went and collected, they collected data from all these randomized controlled trials that had been done and put together in a meta-analytic form. But instead of looking at how successful were you, they looked at how many people didn't get better or got worse at the end of treatment, and found no significant difference between any other active treatment and much better outcomes than weightless controls where, no therapy doesn't work. So, and that was a relatively large study. I think 350 people were aggregated in that. Deborah Bidell has tracked people down a year after they dropped out of exposure, VR exposure, and did an interview with them and found they were no worse off than when they first came in. They weren't any better, but
they weren't
so,
worse.
but I don't think there's any one study that's going to prove this, and you can't eliminate the quality of the clinical care that this is delivered in the context of good clinical care. But I think we've begun to answer that question, that these things, when done in a proper clinical setting, it can do more good and not do the harm that was anticipated. Now, those issues will be challenged as we start to see more self-help in these areas. Like, for example, fear of public speaking. It's we all had it in the beginning, or we still have it a little bit of practice, you get over it. And even though it would rate up there as a DSM diagnosis, we give a free pass to that in VR. You can go online with your Oculus Quest and find public speaking training applications and do self-exposure by yourself, no clinician. We kind of cast a blind eye to it. But now, and this is actually based on some good work, Dan Freeman at Oxford has done work with fear of heights, where he sends a headset home, and person's properly diagnosed, treatment plan is laid in place. It's that part still involves a clinician, but the patient does their VR exposure for heights at home, and there's a little character like a chatbot, but not that interactive, but a guide that guides you through, and they find as effective results with the self-administered exposure as in the office. So maybe we have to reframe what the clinician does in some cases, and this is very circumscribed with fear of heights. I don't know if I would go that route with PTSD. I think
complex, for sure.
I think the therapeutic alliance really, that social support really
and
matters.
In part two of the show, I want to talk about the VR therapist and what that actually means in a context of a quote metaverse. And we are very close to the end of this one, but there is certainly something here that I just want to touch on, which is you and I both know, because we've both been therapists, people tend to take the foot off the accelerator when they're close to the finish line, whether that's in meeting a goal and having success, or whether that's therapeutically in dealing with their shit. And it's like, why did you back off? I mean, I see it. Right? I work with very high level people who are like incredibly courageous, do all kinds of great stuff. And it's like, why did you disappear? You paid me a chunk of change to walk you through. I'm fully committed to doing that. And you backed away. And that fear of, and again, I think it's identity. I'm going to lose my identity. This identity sucks. I hate it, but it's all I've got. And so you're hanging onto the barn door, floating in the ocean, and the ship goes by, and you're going, I'm not letting go of the barn door. But the ship's here. I'm bringing you the ship, dude.
Yep.
Yeah, but if I let go of the barn door, I might drown. Yeah, and you also might actually be able to live. And that for me, and that's where I describe it, the barn door versus the ship analogy is fascinating for me. And that's what I'm really interested in. Do you see a significant difference with that backing off with the VR version?
I think what we do see is in the later sessions that people go into them with a little bit more gusto because they've had this empowering experience of facing some of this stuff down and not having that abject terror or that desire to escape and avoid, because we know avoidance reinforces continued avoidance.
Yeah.
But I don't think I can point to objective data, because we have had people drop out in session 7, 8 out of a 10, 11 session protocol. And it's like, oh, you just got to go that extra couple inches. Oh, I'm good now. I got over it. I faced down my fear and everything. And, is it pragmatics? Is it, do people just not like to go to therapy for these kinds of problems? Do they feel like I got it now? I really wish I knew how to get people to go that last mile, because that last mile really matters.
Yeah.
In any therapeutic process, preparing for termination at the end is an actual therapeutic process right then and there.
Let's take your let's cut you open, take your appendix out, but not bother sewing you up, because you go, well, you took my appendix out. That was the problem, right?
Yeah, right.
I'm fine.
Exactly.
I can get up and go now.
Exactly.
And to me, that's kind of a good analogy of like, we need to sew the thing up, dude. All right, we are already at the end of part 1 of the show. We're going to be back for more of this delicious conversation with Dr. Skip Rizzo. We're going to be back with part 2 of that. But before we go to part 2, Skip, please tell our audience where they can find out more about you, about all the resources that you have, about all the technology, so that they can tap in and maybe be part of what it is that you're doing.
Well, you can always find me at University of Southern California Institute for Creative Technologies. That's where my lab is based. I don't have a problem giving out my email, rizzo@ict.usc.edu. I try to answer emails as best I can. It's hard sometimes, but to find out about the work, ICT is probably the best place. But if you send me an email, I can then forward you more comprehensive papers and my YouTube directory. If you punch in Albert Skip Rizzo on YouTube, you'll come to my channel where about 150 videos of projects, and
including him taking his mom on a virtual reality tour of Rome, I think it is.
Yeah.
So that's fun to watch. Okay, we're going to be back for more of this delicious conversation with Dr. Skip Rizzo in just one click. So stay curious, my friends. Stay curious. See you in part 2.